The prairie had a way of swallowing a man's thoughts. Caleb Harlow leaned on the rail of his porch, shoulders bowed beneath the weight of a day's silence, and let the horizon do its work on him. The sky stretched vast and endless, burnt orange at the rim, bleeding into a blue so deep it seemed to hold secrets older than scripture. Dust swirled in the dying light, drifting like smoke from a distant fire. Out here, the land itself was a memory, one that could not be shaken off no matter how far you rode. He chewed slow on a stalk of grass and narrowed his eyes. Something stirred on the rim of sight, no more than a dark fleck against the fading blaze of evening. Rider. Lone. The wind shifted, carrying the faint thud of hooves across the wide basin. For a long while he stayed still, his jaw tightening. He'd learned not to trust arrivals. They always carried stories, and stories often led to ruin. Yet as the figure drew closer, the shape became clearer. A woman bent in her saddle, shawl flapping like a torn flag in the breeze. Her horse looked near spent, head lowered, nostrils foaming. She carried no luggage but her own weariness. Caleb set the grass aside and straightened, a slow ache rising in his back. His first thought was to turn away, to let the stranger ride past, but the lantern he had left glowing in the barn window already betrayed him. Out here a light meant hope. Out here, no soul could ignore another at dusk without becoming less human for it. The woman stopped short of his porch, sliding clumsily from the saddle. Dust clung to her skirt, her boots, her hair. She steadied herself against the fence post, chin lifted though her eyes betrayed how close she was to falling. "I won't ask more than water," she said. Her voice was hoarse, scratched raw by wind. "Just a drink, and I'll be gone." Caleb studied her, the lantern's glow spilling across her face. She wasn't old, yet sorrow aged her in a way years never could. Lines of sleepless nights carved into her brow, shadows pooling beneath her eyes. Her name came to him in a whisper, as if the prairie itself carried it. Evangeline Boone. He'd heard the town whisper it often enough. "You've ridden far," he said at last, his tone flat, neither welcome nor denial. Her gaze flickered. She knew the weight of her name in his mouth. To the town she was marked, widow of a gambler, accused of sheltering the half-breed drifter Silas Crow. They called her traitor. Some spat when she passed. A woman like her could not even stand at the well without feeling eyes on her back. "I'll move on before dawn," she murmured. "Won't trouble you longer than a night breeze." Caleb went inside without reply. She stood where she was, shoulders trembling though she tried to hold them steady. When he returned, he held a tin cup filled with water drawn from his own bucket. Without a word he handed it over. Eva took it with both hands, and for a moment her lips brushed the same edge his had touched earlier. She noticed, he noticed. Neither spoke of it. She drank slow, each swallow like a prayer. "You can bed down in the barn," Caleb said finally. "Plenty of straw. Horse can rest there too." Her throat worked around another swallow, but her eyes glistened in the lantern's glow. "Kindness'll cost you," she warned softly. He shrugged, his silence answering what words could not. Later that night, the sound of hooves returned. Caleb stepped out again, rifle leaning against the doorframe, though he let it rest untouched. Sheriff Amos Callahan rode up, the law stitched into every crease of his hard face. His horse snorted, stamping dust into the lantern-lit yard. "Heard a rider came this way," Callahan said. His gaze swept the porch, then the barn where faint light glowed through the cracks. "She carrying her shame here, Harlow?" Caleb met the sheriff's eyes but offered no confession. The silence itself was heavy as iron. Callahan's lip curled, half sneer, half warning. Towns had its fill of Boone. A man takes her in, he carries her sins too. You'd best not grow interested in her troubles. The sheriff tugged his reins and rode off, the echo of his words lingering long after the hoofbeats faded into the prairie's dark. Inside the barn, Eva lay curled on the straw. She whispered into the hollow space, as if the rafters alone could keep her secrets. If only for tonight. Her voice broke against the quiet. Above her, the barn roof groaned with the night wind. Beyond, Caleb stood a moment at the door, listening. His hand hovered over the latch, but he did not open it. Instead, he let the silence close around them both. The prairie exhaled a slow, endless breath, carrying dust across the horizon. Two exiles under one roof, bound not by trust, not yet by love, but by the faintest flicker of mercy, something fragile enough to tremble, yet strong enough to endure the coming storm. Morning crept across the prairie with a hush, the kind of dawn that seemed reluctant to wake the world. Mist clung low to the grass, turning the fields silver. Caleb Harlow found Eva already awake, her hair tangled, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. She was sitting on the barn's threshold, watching the pale sun climb as if waiting for a verdict. "You work early?" she asked, voice still rough from sleep. "Work don't wait," Caleb answered, sliding the bridle onto his gelding. His words were clipped, but not cold. He had spoken more to her in one morning than he'd spoken to most neighbors in a year. Eva rose slowly, brushing straw from her skirt. "Then I'll help." And she did. The hours unfolded with quiet diligence. She gathered eggs from restless hens, smoothed the dirt floor with a broom handle, mended a torn harness strap with fingers more skilled than she let on. Caleb watched from the edge of his chores, silent, cautious. She moved with a careful grace, as if each small task was a way of proving she belonged, even if only for a moment. By midday, she stood on the porch with flour smudging her hands, gazing out at the endless plain. "Funny," she said softly, almost to herself. "I spent years in town and never felt welcome. Yet here, with only the wind for company, I feel less alone." Caleb adjusted the brim of his hat. "Wind don't judge." Her lips curved in something not quite a smile but close. At the general store later that week, Eva walked a half-step behind Caleb. Whispers followed like shadows. A mother clutched her child's wrist, pulling him away from her path. Two men paused their conversation, eyes narrowing. It was Martha Jane, the storekeeper, who broke the spell. With a wink, she slipped Eva an extra scoop of flour and pressed her hand gently. "Don't mind crows," Martha whispered. "They caw loud but fly scared." Outside, the air tasted of smoke and judgment. Caleb carried the supplies while Eva kept her head low. Sheriff Callahan's voice reached them before his boots did. "Harlow." The sheriff leaned against the hitching post, thumbs hooked in his belt. His gaze slid to Eva, then back to Caleb. "You think folks don't notice? A man's heart can lead him to ruin when he grows interested in the wrong woman." Caleb didn't answer. He adjusted the sack on his shoulder and walked past, Eva trailing close. Silence was his only shield, but it held like steel. Evenings became their own quiet ritual. Caleb lit the lantern and set a cup of coffee by Eva's seat before dawn. Eva, without asking, mended the tear in his only good shirt, the stitches neat and precise. Their eyes met over small gestures. The cup set a little nearer, the shirt folded on the chair. Neither spoke of what stirred beneath those silences. It was by the firelight one night, wind rattling the shutters, that Eva finally told her truth. "I know what they say," she whispered, staring into the flames. "That I harbored Silas Crow. That I betrayed my own kind." The fire snapped, sparks leaping like startled birds. Caleb said nothing, waiting. Eva's voice wavered but held steady. "He came to me half-starved. I saw death in his eyes. And I gave him bread, water. That was all. For mercy, they named me traitor." Her hands trembled in her lap, but she did not look away from the fire. "I'd do it again, even knowing what it cost me." Caleb's jaw tightened. His hand closed around the edge of his cup until the metal cooled against his palm. Not in anger. In recognition. He too had once been saved by a stranger's mercy, though he had never spoken of it. "Sometimes," he said at last, voice low, "law ain't the same as justice." Eva's eyes flicked toward him, searching, and in that silence something fragile was exchanged. Trust, or at least the first glimmer of it. The prairie at dusk was a confessional. Coyotes cried in the distance, and the air smelled of rain drifting from the west. Eva stood on the porch, shawl wrapped tight, hair lifted by the breeze. Caleb joined her, hat in hand. For a long moment they simply breathed the same air, the storm rolling closer. Then came the sound of hooves. Lantern light flickered across faces grim with purpose. Sheriff Callahan dismounted, flanked by two men with hard eyes and restless hands. "You've had your time," Callahan said, voice sharp as a whip. "The town won't stand her shadow darkening our streets. Hand her over, Caleb." Caleb stood still. Lantern glow stretched his shadow long against the dust. His rifle leaned inside, but he did not reach for it. "She stays," he said. The words were soft, but the quiet afterward was sharper than steel. Callahan's jaw tightened. "Then so falls your name with hers." The sheriff mounted again, torchlight painting his face in cruel strokes. The riders wheeled, hoofs pounding into the night, leaving silence heavy as judgment behind them. Eva's breath shuddered in the stillness. "You've tied your fate to mine now," she whispered, voice breaking like dry wood. Caleb turned toward the horizon, where the storm finally broke into a scatter of distant lightning. His reply was slow, deliberate. "Some things ain't meant to be carried alone." In that moment, beneath the thunder's low roll, their exile became shared. Ashes between them, yes, but in ashes sometimes a fire waits to rise again. The prairie at night was never truly silent. It breathed. Wind combed through the grass with a restless hand. Coyotes sang from far ridges. The barn timbers creaked like old bones remembering storms past. But beneath all that, another sound grew. A murmur, a low growl of voices carried on the wind. Caleb Harlow heard it before Eva did. He was sitting by the fire, mending a rope with the patient rhythm of a man who had learned the value of quiet work. When the voices reached him, his hand stilled. "They're coming," he said, though his tone carried no panic. Just the gravity of inevitability. Eva looked up, eyes wide in the lamplight. "The sheriff." He nodded once. She pressed her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "You'll lose everything for me." Her voice was raw, threaded with guilt and fear, the kind of fear that comes not from death but from being the cause of another's fall. Caleb set the rope aside and leaned back in his chair. The firelight carved shadows along his jaw, softened his weathered face. "What's everything worth," he said quietly, "if it means turning a soul away into the dark?" The words landed heavy in the space between them. She lowered her gaze, but tears shimmered at the edge of her lashes. By the time the mob arrived, torches glowed against the night like a river of fire winding down the ridge. Hooves churned the earth, voices rose and clashed, and at their head sat Sheriff Amos Callahan, a man carved from law and pride. His eyes glittered hard beneath the brim of his hat. The riders fanned out, surrounding the ranch. Flames licked upward from the torches, painting the faces of men tight with anger, or perhaps fear, though they'd never admit it. Callahan's voice cut through the night. "Caleb Harlow, hand her over. She carries shame enough to poison this land. You stand with her, you fall with her." Eva stood frozen by the hearth. Caleb rose slowly, his boots heavy against the wood floor, each step deliberate. He took up no weapon. Instead, he opened the door and stepped into the torchlit dark. The night air was sharp, carrying the scent of coming rain. His breath fogged faint in the chill. Lantern light from the house stretched his shadow long, giving him the look of a man both larger and smaller than himself, fragile in body, immense in resolve. "I won't hand her over," he said, his voice low but steady. A murmur rippled through the gathered men. Callahan's jaw worked, but he did not yet give the order. The torches crackled, spitting embers into the black sky. "Don't make yourself a fool, Caleb," the sheriff warned. "This woman's no innocent. She chose her side." Caleb let the silence settle before he answered. Maybe she did. Maybe mercy was her side. And maybe the law's forgotten that mercy has a place. The mob shifted, unease threading through their anger. A few men exchanged glances, their grips on the torches loosening. Then Caleb did something no one expected. He stepped closer into the circle of firelight, and spoke not of Eva but of himself. "Years back," he said, voice thick with memory, "I was left bleeding out on the trail after a raid. No one in town would touch me, called me cursed, said death was already on me. I would have died under that sky if a stranger hadn't carried me into shelter, fed me, asked nothing in return. That mercy, unearned, unspoken, brought me back." He let the weight of the confession hang in the air. "So if you want to damn me now for giving the same, do it. But I won't turn her away. Not tonight. Not ever." The flames hissed as the wind shifted. The men's eyes darted, searching each other for certainty. One by one, their shoulders lowered, their torches dipping slightly toward the ground. The barn door creaked open behind him. Eva stepped out, shawl slipping from her shoulders. Her face was pale but steady, her voice carrying clear into the night. "If mercy is a crime," she said, "then I am guilty. But I will not run any more." Her words struck sharper than Caleb's, because they carried no defense, only defiance. She stood beside him, small against the mob's blaze, yet unflinching. Sheriff Callahan's gaze hardened. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might push them all into violence. But something in the stillness held him. Maybe it was the honesty in Caleb's voice. Maybe it was the way Eva's defiance stripped the threat of fear. Or maybe it was the first few raindrops striking the dirt, hissing against the torch flames. Callahan spat into the dust. "Your graves'll be your own doing." He tugged his reins, wheeled his horse, and rode into the dark. One by one, the others followed, torches dimming as the storm rolled in. The prairie fell silent again except for the rain, soft at first, then steady, washing the dust from the earth. Caleb and Eva stood side by side, the storm soaking them, the torch's smoke rising in thin, dying threads. She let out a long, trembling breath, as though she'd been holding it her whole life. Caleb glanced at her, rain tracing the lines of her face. For once, she did not look away. They walked back to the house together, not hand in hand, not with declarations, but with the unspoken bond of two exiles who had chosen to stand rather than bow. Epilogue. A reflection to the listener. I reckon you've known a moment like theirs, though maybe you've called it by another name. Maybe you've felt the sting of whispers that try to tell you what you're worth, or the weight of a world that says kindness is weakness. Out here, beneath a sky too wide to hold a lie, I learned a truth that clings like dust to the skin. Mercy is the truest law. And sometimes the smallest act of interest in another soul, just a cup of water, a place in the barn, can turn exile into belonging and shame into love. So if you find yourself standing where the torches burn and the voices rise, remember Caleb Harlow and Eva Boone. Remember that dignity comes not from what others call you, but from where you choose to stand when the night grows long. And should you ever doubt it, just look to the horizon. Dust may rise, storms may come, but mercy, once chosen, stands taller than them all.